it was just curiosity that drove me to want to start this podcast, this hunger to learn more. Like many of you, I had so many questions after reading Body by Science. I was so excited to talk to Doug about that. And after I interviewed him, it was really fascinating because a lot of the feedback I had afterwards were like, oh, it's like you're reading my mind. I had exactly the same question you did. And that was really lovely to learn that and to connect with a lot of you through that sense.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross. Simon has 15 years' experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, and Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, and the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention that there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regimen. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10. That's CW and the number 10. So again, that's hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10. Thank you for your support.
Hello ladies and gents, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. This podcast is my mission to understand how to better optimize productivity in health, career, business and lifestyle. My guests include health and fitness giants, high-intensity training specialists, underground, rarely interviewed exercise experts, athletes, scientists, New York Times best-selling authors, highly successful entrepreneurs, life hackers, finance experts, extreme endurance adventure racers, and many, many more. My next guest is me. This is another in-between episode where I explore how to start and grow a podcast that gets over 30,000 downloads per month. Yes, that is my podcast, and I am going to talk you through how to do it. Yes, that's right, you get the pleasure of listening to my voice for an entire 40 minutes. I think you will find this really useful if you're just starting out in podcasting or considering it for the first time, because I'll tell you exactly how I've done what I've done to get my podcast to where it is today. And in this interview, I will cover why you need to think about the why, as in terms of why you're doing what you're doing, how to get started in terms of picking a niche, the publishing frequency, equipment, etc., marketing strategies, monetization, systems and outsourcing, and much, much more. For all of the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/podcast. Now, without further ado, please relax and enjoy this with yours truly. What's up, guys? This is Lawrence, and this is a very meta podcast for you today. I've decided to record a podcast to talk you through how to start and grow a podcast to 30,000 downloads per month, which is where my podcast is at in terms of the monthly download volume currently. It's a very meta topic indeed, and something a bit removed from the typical health and fitness side of things. As you guys know, this podcast is all about optimizing productivity in terms of not only health and fitness, but also business and lifestyle. And with podcasting being a growing area and something which, a few friends of me have asked, how do I, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And I thought, well, why don't I try and create a short resource that might be useful for some of you when you're first starting out and trying to figure this whole thing out. You could consider this podcast a bit of an early bird or newbie version of Tim Ferriss's How to Build a Podcast with 80 billion downloads, or however many he's at these days, which it's not actually that, it's actually something like 60 million, but it's a fantastic post he wrote, which I got a lot of benefit from and learned a ton from that, and certainly informed some of my strategy. But at the same time, I feel like sometimes people struggle to maybe relate to his work because he's just so successful. So maybe it will be easier to relate to someone like me who's a little bit further down the ladder, but has managed to, I suppose, build a fairly successful podcast, all things considered. So this is really my thoughts. Obviously, there's so much in the way of like podcasting and marketing methods out there for, what is the most effective way to create a successful podcast. And I'm just going to tell you exactly what I did and what I think works, for me anyway. So just to start off with, I think the most important thing to think about first is, why are you doing this? Why are you considering a podcast? The reason why I did it was kind of a complete accident. Some of you already know this, but I read Body by Science from Dr. Doug McGuff, and I absolutely loved it. And one of the best, if not the best book on exercise I've ever read. And I was so blown away by the book, and I had so many follow-up questions that I thought, why don't I just email Doug, who's one of the authors, and ask him if he wants to, record an interview together and then post it on the website. And we did that, and he was being as kind and generous as Doug is. He was happy to come and be interviewed. I say come be interviewed; it was a Skype interview, but obviously that was very generous of him, because I had no audience really. I had a very small amount of web traffic, and obviously I had no established podcast. But all you have to do is ask, and some people will say yes. And I think a lot of people realise that. A lot of people ask me, like, how do you get guests, and we'll come on to that in a bit. But anyway, it was just curiosity that drove me to want to start this podcast, this hunger to learn more. Like many of you, I had so many questions after reading Body by Science. I was so excited to talk to Doug about that. And after I interviewed him, it was really fascinating, because a lot of the feedback I had afterwards were, you guys who are real huge fans of Body by Science and the kind of high intensity training movement in general, and you were like, oh, it's like you're reading my mind. I had exactly the same question you did, and that was really lovely to learn that, and to kind of connect with a lot of you through in that sense. So I guess why did I do it? So you got the curiosity and the want to learn, which is a big driver for me. And then the thing that sustained it for me is this want to serve. So after I kind of I started getting a lot more positive feedback. I started getting a lot of really lovely messages over social media, a lot of really, really flattering emails, which, some of which brought a tear to my eye. It really were. It's very encouraging to see or learn that something that you're doing for fun is having such a big and positive impact on other people. And that was a kind of a real aha moment for me, because I suddenly realized, wow, I've started doing something here that people seem to really like, and maybe I could turn this into a career. And that's when I decided to see how I could turn this into a business of my own design. And we'll come on to that a bit later. So that's the first thing. So figure out why you're doing it, or why you've decided to do it. Because the other thing as well, it might be that, audio podcasting might not be the medium for you. I have a background in sales, so I've been in sales for IT companies over the last 8 years. So I feel like I'm quite good, I suppose, at asking questions. Obviously, I've still got a lot of improvement to do there, and and it's something I'm still working on, but I feel like it was one of my natural strengths. So I kind of felt like I was quite good at podcasting fairly quickly. And so that format worked for me. But there are other formats to choose from, and audio or podcasting might not be the best format for you. You could do video. I'm personally not very good on video. I'm not very good at just being a natural. So that's why I haven't chose that medium. It might be something I do in the future. You could choose to write a blog and just be, master the written word and communicate with your audience that way. So really try and figure out, what is the medium for you. Don't just don't just kind of default to podcasting because it's the next big thing. Because at the end of the day, if you're putting out fantastic content, the best work you can do, the medium, I think, is kind of irrelevant. I think you're going to have an impact so long as you do your best work and you do it consistently. So the next thing is, I guess, identifying your niche. So this is a bit of a cliche in the business, sort of online business world, and I suppose that is your unique selling point. And I definitely took the advice from my favorite kind of online mentor out there, which is Tim Ferriss, Mr. Tim Ferriss, and he's always going on about scratching your own itch, because if you start a business or start creating content that is scratching your own itch, you're going to please a market of one, and that's yourself. And the chances are there's plenty of other people out there just like you who are also going to be interested. But the other really important thing is, if you're doing it for yourself and you're creating content and having an experience that you really enjoy, then you're far more likely to sustain it in the long term. So what this looked like for me, and why I think the podcast has grown quite successfully, is I opted for the long form approach. So I've deliberately done 1 to 2 hour podcasts. I feel like it really takes that much time to really warm up with guests and really build a rapport. And also, if I'm really digging into questions and going into multiple layers of kind of the same themes, I need more time to do that. So that was one of the drivers for going long form. And also, I tend to do 1, 2, or even 3-part episodes. I've had some guests on. I've had Doug on, Dr. Doug McGuff, on 3 times. And that's because, I also feel there's value in doing, 3 1 to 2 hour sessions with someone, because you can really go deep into the subject. So that's why I've kind of opted for doing multiple episodes with the same people. I've gone hyper niche in some areas. So I do focus a lot on high intensity training and I guess evidence-based resistance training, because I find it fascinating. I'm always keen to understand how I can be more effective with my workouts, and how I can get more bang for the buck and become healthier and build more muscle and burn fat more effectively and stuff like that. So I have kind of deliberately created a lot of content in the high intensity training space and gone almost hyper niche, if you will, on that topic. And that has definitely built a much bigger audience, because I've kind of created, I guess, so much content in a very small niche, which might be setting me apart from other podcasts and other content out there. Although I know there's plenty of other people producing great content out there on very similar topics. And the other thing as well is I do get bored, if I'm honest, talking about high intensity training all the damn time. So that's kind of why I broadened it out to saying this podcast and blog is about optimizing not only, health and fitness and training, but also your lifestyle and your business activity. Because those are things I'm really interested in. If I didn't do that as well, it would drive me mad. I'd probably get bored just talking about high intensity training nonstop. And then the last thing I would say in that another method in which I use to make my content unique as much as I can is by just trying to be as thoroughly prepared as possible. So I try in some episodes to really make sure that I listen to previous interviews the guests have done, have read their books, have read their most popular articles, and use that to try and craft my own questions and try and make sure that the podcast is going to be as valuable as possible for me and also you guys. And I did actually drop the ball on this. I did a few episodes where, put my hands up, my preparation wasn't as good, and some of you called me out on that, and I appreciate that, because it kind of affirmed my own doubt that I need to go back to my ways where I'm putting a lot more effort into my preparation, because I think that's what made this podcast really, really good. So those are the things I've done to kind of make my podcast unique, and I think those things have made it really successful. And I'll come on to some other things as well. And your content doesn't have to meet that criteria. It's just whatever you think is going to make it interesting for you. And I think in doing that, you'll find that you will make it unique. And with that, I would suggest if you do decide to do a podcast, I would, again, this is taking Tim Ferriss's advice, I would commit to doing 6. So commit to doing 6 episodes, and then use that as a kind of a test to see, firstly, is your podcast really resonating with people? Like, is it going from strength to strength? Chances are, if it's not, you're not going to be that interested. However, if you are really enjoying it, then keep going. There's no reason not to, and maybe it will take a little longer to build that audience. But commit to 6 as as just a starter, because I think you need to do more than, I guess, a handful in order to really know if it's going to be something you want to do long term. Stick to a weekly quota in terms of content production that you can adhere to, and it's not going to be overwhelming. I personally currently do 1 episode per week, or I strive to do 1 episode per week. You may want to do 1 every 2 weeks or 1 a month, but just make sure that you have a quota that is achievable. And obviously that's very subjective. It depends on what you have going on in your life, how many other responsibilities do you have. I think if you give yourself too much, you will not sustain the effort, and you won't build whatever it is you set off to build. And so by doing a very achievable quota, I would even make it easy. And that way you rig the game so that you psychologically win. So if you do 1 episode 1 week and you're like, oh wow, I've still got plenty of time on Thursday and Friday, then you might want to do 2 episodes, and that's fine also. But just don't set your sights too high week to week, and give yourself a realistic quota. This is something I didn't do, but I hear lots of other people doing this, and it sounds like the way to go. I would make sure that you release 2 or 3 or more podcasts all at once when you first launch. Don't do 1 like I did. And the reason for that is because you take advantage of the new and noteworthy episodes on iTunes, which is kind of self-propagating. It means you rank better, which means you get more downloads, and so on and so forth. And that can really help you out at the start. It's something I did not do, and I regret not doing. Now, going on to resources and equipment and things like that, keep it really, really simple. Do not overinvest and overcomplicate your setup. It will, again, just make this whole thing far too complicated, and may cause you to give up before you even get started. My setup is still so simple. I use the same mic that Pat Flynn and Tim Ferriss use, which is the Audio Technica. I'm looking at it because I can't remember the name. ATR 2100, which I got off Amazon for like £100, or I don't know, whatever that is, $130 or whatever. So quite affordable and very, very good value for money mic, I would say. So that's the mic. I use Skype to do the interviews. So whether it be a 1-on-1 or 1-on-2, and I think 1-on-2 is the most I've done so far, I use Skype, and I use the Ecamm call recorder software with that, which is a free download, which just integrates to Skype really easily and records the calls and records them back onto your Mac locally, laptop, just defaulted to Mac there, and which you can then you can use the video and you can upload that to YouTube, or you can do what I do, which is just convert it to audio and put it on your hosting platform, which I will come on to next. So I use Libsyn, that's libsyn.com, stands for Liberated Syndication. They're a fantastic host, and essentially what you do is you register, you pay a small monthly fee for a certain amount of data and storage, and then you upload your audio files to Libsyn, and then from there you can distributed to all of the different destinations online. So that, obviously iTunes is the most important one, but you may want to distribute to other places like Stitcher, and there are various other podcast aggregators online, and Libsyn does all of this automatically for you. I then have the website, so my blog, which is 15minutecorporatewarrior.com, is all based on WordPress. So I find WordPress to be a very easy website backend to use. It takes a little bit of, I guess, practice just to understand how it works. But I find, once you spend like a few hours or a day on the software, it's one of the better options out there. I know there's plenty of other back ends that people use, but WordPress is say back ends, front ends, whatever it is. WordPress is the platform that I like to use, and you can create a very simple blog on WordPress. You can then create blog posts with all your show notes like I do. So for every podcast I do, I have a little bit about the guest, their bio, and then all of the show notes, so the minutes with all of the discussion points, and then all of the resources. So, all of the guests, people that I mentioned, all of the books and resources, all of that stuff. And then obviously you can affiliate link that, and that can bring in a small amount of revenue. Although I don't think many people are getting rich through Amazon affiliates unless you're driving hundreds of thousands or millions of visitors, because I certainly don't make very much money at all from that. But maybe it's a good long-term strategy. And it's a great place to send your listeners. So obviously at the end of every podcast I do, I always quote the URL to my podcast page, so all you guys can look at the show notes and look at the links and all that kind of thing. But also on that blog post, you can put graphics on there with direct links to iTunes and Stitcher, and a direct download. So if someone wants to click it and actually download the podcast locally, which a lot of you guys do, so that can be a worthwhile practice. Get a very basic, it doesn't have to be complicated, just a very basic blog with all of the essentials that you can just send your listeners to, and it kind of becomes your home base for everything that you do. And then lastly, you can edit the audio on platforms like GarageBand or Audacity, and there's some other platforms out there. I think GarageBand and Audacity I think they're the most popular. But personally, I actually think if this isn't something that you don't have the expertise in, I would recommend that you outsource it. It's really affordable. You can outsource, each episode for probably under £20 or $30 per episode. And have someone else take that headache away from you, unless you enjoy doing that yourself. But again, it comes down to whether or not you're going to sustain this long term. And I think if you can outsource some of the stuff that you might not be interested in doing, I certainly I'm not interested in editing audio, then I think outsourcing that can be a good thing to do. Obviously, it depends on your budget. Now let's move on to how I get guests. So this is really funny because a lot of people say to me, like, how do you get guests, and do you pay guests? And it's much simpler than you think. It literally, 9 times out of 10, when you email someone, so long as they're not mega high profile, they're gonna say yes, because to them it's marketing. I think anyone who's kind of doing stuff online is aware that the podcasting market is growing, and then they see the value in being on a podcast and how that can benefit their brand and help them sell more products and stuff like that. But also a lot of them, I guess, are just really interested talking about this stuff. I do, when I email guests to invite them on the show, I do show appreciation for their work. I never really interview someone that I don't want to interview. I try to avoid that as a strategy, even if you guys are asking me to interview someone, because again, it kind of conflicts with the whole do something that you're interested in. Because if I'm really not interested in interviewing someone, likelihood is it's not going to be a great interview. Occasionally, I suppose I will say, and this is going to contradict what I said a little bit, I do sometimes interview people that I don't know much about, and I maybe have some reservations or some apprehension because, I'm not, maybe it's someone that you guys are really keen on, and I've not heard a lot about. But actually, funnily enough, most of the time when I've interviewed that person, and obviously I've done all the prep beforehand, so I've learned a lot about them. I actually really enjoy the interview, and I'm glad I did it. So I know I kind of contradicted myself there, but there's just some caveats to what I was saying. So going back to what I was saying, so in terms of getting guests, literally send an email. Show them that you have looked at their work and that you appreciate their work, and maybe, show that you've done your homework. So maybe suggest something in an email or point something out, something that you liked about what they did. And obviously, you want to make it attractive for them. You want to give it a what's in it for them statement. So at the start, it's kind of difficult because you might not have obviously any downloads, but what you might have something else you can offer. So you may have, let's say you already have a blog and you already have an audience, then you can say, oh, I get X amount of hits per day, or I have a social media following of X, and use what you have. And if you don't have anything, don't worry about it. Just show your appreciation and show them why you want to get them on to your podcast, what you want to talk about, why it's going to be great for them too, and I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm sure you'll get plenty of people who will be very happy to join you. And obviously, as you build up a roster of more and more guests, you're going to have more ammunition for when you go out and get guests later on. So you can, quote previous guests' names. So even when I was only getting 1,000 downloads a month, I could go to people and say, hey, I've had Dr. Doug McGuff on my podcast, and I've had Drew Bay. And these are the people that obviously most people certainly in the high intensity training niche know very, very well. So they're like, well, if those guys are on a podcast, then it's obviously worth being on, or at least worth exploring further. So that works very well. So name dropping previous guests. And then once you do get to a level of downloads, which is significant, so I don't know, once you're at the kind of 5,000 to 10,000 a month mark, you can then start showing stats and using that and saying, look, based on my growth today, I think I'm going to be at 20,000 by this month, and obviously use that to make it even more compelling. And then you can, as I've kind of hinted at earlier, you can talk about your existing audience. So you can talk about the number of people on your email list, your web traffic to your blog, your social audience. So how many followers do you have on Twitter, how many likes on Facebook? All these things are attractive to potential guests. All these people are, at the end of the day, all these guests are very busy people. They've all got their own projects and things they're focused on, and it makes sense for them to be very picky. So you have to make it compelling for some of these people to want to join you. And certainly when you start engaging people who are far more high profile, they have to be very picky, because they have these huge opportunities, and they're not necessarily going to go on your podcast if it's not going to be a great investment of their time. And that's I've had that, and there's still plenty of people who are very high profile who probably aren't ready to come on my podcast yet, because I'm not big enough, and that's absolutely fine, and I understand that. And it's just a case of, I guess, some people don't care, some people aren't that strategic, and very high profile will still come on your podcast regardless, and others are very very picky, and you just have to play the numbers to an extent, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of marketing, so I think ultimately with podcasting and with any content creation, great content markets itself. So if you're always improving, so in terms of the podcasting, if you're always improving the quality, honing your interview skills, really, really honing your preparation, and you're building on your ability to build relationships, you're going to have more success in terms of your marketing, because your content's going to be more and more successful. It's going to get more word of mouth. People are going to want to share it. But you've got to have that attitude where you're always improving it. So whether not just the interview style, but also the show notes. Are you making the blog post better every time? Is the layout better? Are you providing richer content? Are the graphics appealing? Is the user experience good? And just making sure that you're doing your best work. And I think, honestly, if you take nothing else away from this marketing section that we're covering now, and you were just you just focused on creating the best content you can, I think that is by far the most important thing you can do. And I think that alone will help you build a successful podcast. But I guess some supplementary things to add to that is, every time you do bring on a new guest and do a new podcast, you are basically exposing your medium to a whole new audience, and that is that guest's audience, which is a pretty awesome thing, because suddenly they share it with their audience once it's live, and then you have all these people listen to it, and they're like, oh my god, I love that, and then a lot of those will then listen to the rest of your work, and then you'll build your audience further. And I guess just to add to that, I never use, just to caveat this, I don't ever target a potential guest based on the size of their audience, because firstly, I might not even be interested in talking to that person, regardless of how big their audience is. And I think that's a really important value that I want to carry through my whole journey. But also, it could damage the credibility of the podcast if the episodes and the style isn't congruent with the rest of it. I think you guys will sniff that out, and I think that can really damage the reputation of the podcast, and regardless of how big someone's audience is. So I never ever pick a potential guest based on their existing audience. If I really want to talk to someone and they have a massive audience, then fantastic. I mean, Brad Schoenfeld was a very good example of that. He was someone who I was really keen to talk to for a while, very kind of on the sort of more high volume, not I'm going to say anti high intensity training, but he's not like a pure high intensity training advocate. And a lot of you guys wanted me to interview him because he had because he was of a different opinion in terms of what training methods were optimal for muscular hypertrophy. So that was kind of a triple threat type situation. I really wanted to talk to him. You guys really wanted me to talk to him. And he had a really big audience. So when he posted the episode on his Facebook page, it was ridiculous. It got like 400 likes and 50 shares, and it was just in one day it got like 2,500 downloads or something. So it's nuts for me, at least. Social media. This is an interesting one. So I've got a pretty controversial viewpoint on social media. I actually, again, don't think you really have to do it. I think, again, if you do really great content, people are going to share that on their social media, and that's great. Let them do that, because social media platforms are wonderful. They allow that spread of content and that kind of online word of mouth. But I think you have to be careful with investing in social media yourself. So I am on Facebook, yes, and I am on Twitter. That's it. I don't do any of the other social media platforms because I don't want to spread myself that thin. And I just want to get good at one or two platforms. And where I think there's value in is the ability to build relationships. So a lot of you comment on the Facebook page, and I've made a lot of friends through Facebook and that type of thing. So that's where I see value. But I'm not convinced that it's where you guys, in terms of those of you starting new podcasts, should really focus your time. I think, again, the best place to be spending your time is just making sure you create the best work you can, the best content, and owning your skills. I think social media should be very, very, very secondary at most. And the last thing is, for marketing, just something I wish I'd done or spent more time on ages ago, is email. Email is, unlike social media, you're not kind of subject to the changes of algorithms and things like that. So the problem with something like Facebook is you could have 10,000 Facebook likes, but then suddenly Facebook changes their algorithm, and then your exposure for each post you publish is suddenly 2% of that, and you have no control over that. Whereas email, you have far more control, and email is still a very effective way to communicate to people. And regardless of what people say, people still use email. It's not dead. It's not a dead channel at all. And people, the open rates are still pretty good. And I find it's a far more less crowded channel than, say, a lot of the social media platforms. So I started building a list. A lot of you will notice I have a pop-up on the blog, and I'm giving away 6 podcast transcriptions for free. And then obviously I drop you guys weekly content. So that could be a podcast, it could be something useful that I find that I want to share with you. And so I think building an email list is a very, very important tool for you to build your audience and build up those relationships and maximize the exposure of your new content. Now, here's the interesting section. So monetization. So this is not what you're going to expect, but I think if your goal is to create a business, so if you think I'm going to do a podcast because I want to generate enough income to replace my job, wrong decision. I think podcasting, whilst it can turn into a business, and there's certainly people out there making a lot of money doing podcasting, it is a long-term strategy. Podcasting is a concerted effort, a frequent concerted effort over a very long period of time. Is what is required to build an audience. And then obviously when you're at that critical mass stage, you can then implement some sort of monetizing, whether that be a sponsor or create your own product or sell someone else's product or advertising or whatever it is. I'm quite happy to be quite transparent. My podcast and blog and everything together makes no more than a few £100 per month at the moment. So very small income. And if you think I've been doing podcasting for 3 or 4 years, it's taken me a while to get there. That being said, I'm sure some of you listening are far more business savvy than me and could probably make a podcast an effective business much sooner than that. But my personal thought is that if you want to build a business, or you want an income to replace a job that you don't enjoy, or you want to build a supplementary income, you're much better off exploring the Muse strategy that Tim Ferriss explores in the 4-Hour Workweek. So it's all about how you can create and build a Muse, which is a cash flow business that can replace your job or supplement your income. Or I would look into Noah Kagan's monthly 1K program, which is a really, really good online program on how to start a business. And both of these programs actually, Tim Ferriss's book and Noah Kagan's course, really do turn the tables in terms of what a business, how you create a business and how you take the risk out of it, and how you test without investing or with very minimal investment up front and this type of thing. And I think these approaches are just fantastic. So if you're really keen on building a business and generating an income, I would sooner look at those options than create a podcast. I think I would only suggest do a podcast if you really are you want to serve others. You want to create something that you're proud of and that you enjoy, but that you also feel a lot of satisfaction in serving other people, because that's why I've done it. And it's only now that I've seen that there is a business opportunity, but it's not the fastest route to it. That's monetization in a nutshell from my point of view. What I would also just suggest in terms of a way to, again, sustain the productivity in terms of putting a podcast out in the long term and putting out content every week, consider systematizing repetitive tasks. So one thing I found is I had a when I was working in London in the UK in sales, I had a very, very good income. And I didn't have a lot of time at the beginning. So I was outsourcing a lot of the work, and I could afford to do that. So I was outsourcing the audio, and I was outsourcing the blog posts. I've got an amazing freelancer who is just better than me and just unbelievable attention to detail. And he was able to create really, really good blog posts for me. And that worked really, really well. And I wish I could continue using him. But since I've now gone full-time on this, I've decided to bring that in-house, at least in the short term, until I can justify outsourcing it again. But if you do have a job or a good income on the side, I really would consider outsourcing the stuff that can be quite repetitive and not that enjoyable, because ultimately if you're doing podcasting and you've managed to keep doing it, it's because you enjoy that interview process, I think. And anything outside of that, you will try and minimize or outsource. I also think checklists are really, really, really important. I recently did another monologue or in-between episode on the value of checklists. So I have a checklist for everything. I have a checklist for, pre-interview prep, so all of the stuff I do before I interview a guest in terms of preparation. I have a checklist for the actual interview itself. I have a checklist for all of the exactly what the post has to look like on the blog. I have a checklist for all of the podcast marketing. I have checklists for what I pack when I travel for 2 days. I have checklists for all sorts of random crap. And it just takes a load of your mind, and it ensures that you are well organized and you don't forget stuff. You know, I find if I don't have a checklist for traveling, even if it's for like 1 or 2 days, I always seem to forget a belt or a charger or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, simple checklists can really help you to just become more efficient and, again, focus on the stuff that's important. Now, in terms of some really, really useful tools that I think will help you, again, sustain the podcast long term and also just make it a bit easier, there's something I use called Schedule Once. I think it's scheduleonce.com. I'll put the link in the blog, which is amazing calendar booking software. It's all software as a service, so it's all based online. Basically, you sync it with your calendar. I sync it with iCal, and then you just send a link. So you block out all of your availability where you want to be doing interviews, and then you send a link to the prospective guest, and then they can just click the link and they can see your availability and they can book it, and it synchronizes the time zones. It's amazing. It will make you a lot more efficient at booking guests. So I highly recommend that. And I also recommend using Boomerang for email, since you'll be doing a lot of like emailing guests, and you may want to follow up. You know, Gary Torbs, good guy that he is, eventually came on the podcast, but I had to follow him up, and I set a reminder for a whole year. In fact, I think he said, give me a year, and I set a reminder using Boomerang for 6 months. And so what that means is once I sent an email, I said, remind me in 6 months. And then in 6 months' time, that email popped to the top of my inbox. And then I was like, okay, yeah, I've got to email Gary again. And I emailed him, and we scheduled a date, which was a big moment. So Boomerang, very, very useful software for reminding you to follow up, and not just on with guests. Obviously, there's lots of things that are useful to set follow-ups for on email, whether that's like, I don't know, something you're waiting for from a friend, or maybe a business opportunity or something like that. But again, it just makes things easier. You don't have to like make a note or have to remember to follow up this email at this point. It just does it all for you. So in summary, why are you doing this? Is podcasting for you? Make sure you thought that through. And if you have, then do a test. Commit to 6 episodes and figure out if it's something you enjoy and if it's something that is resonating with your audience. Keep it really, really freaking simple. Keep the equipment simple and keep the software simple. Make it even more simple than I've said. I mean, I obviously I mentioned I use the mic, the ATR 2100. You don't even need that. You could start off with some earbuds with a built-in mic. I have a friend that does that. Stuart Ralph, OCD Stories, little plug there. He's got an even simpler setup than me, and his podcast has got more downloads than mine. So just shows you that you don't need the audio to be cinema quality to make it work. And consistent, great content is the best marketing, and new guests and being exposed to their audience. So that's where your focus should be. Get the guests that you really, really are passionate about talking to and learning from, and just make sure you do your best work and that you're always improving. And if you start off crap, that's fine. If your first interview is embarrassing and awkward, doesn't matter. Just move on to the next one. Don't worry about your previous and trying to, tweak that. Just focus on the next and always getting better. And, as I said, podcasting, it can be monetized, but it's really not the most efficient way to get there. And if your goal is to build a business that's going to supplant or supplement your job, so do consider Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, Muse strategy, or something like Noah Kagan's monthly 1K. There may be other strategies out there, but I think those two guys are really on the ball when it comes to building businesses quickly and profitably, if I said that correctly. So I think if that is your goal, then do that first. Only really get into podcasting if you're keen on the medium itself and serving others. So I hope this was useful, and those are all the key things that really helped me to get this podcast where it is today. And I'm very proud to say that this month we've eclipsed 30.5 thousand downloads, and thanks to all of you guys for supporting me and for sharing the content. I do really appreciate it, and it makes all of this worthwhile, to be honest with you. So again, these are all the things that I think are important when you're starting out. There's lots of other stuff out there. Other people are writing plenty of blog articles and doing podcasts on how to do this stuff, but this is exactly what I've done pretty much to get to where I am so far, and hopefully I'll be a lot further along next time I talk to you guys on something like this. So take care, and for the show notes for this one and all of the links that I mentioned in this episode, and for all episodes, go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/podcasts. That's 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/podcast, not podcast, sorry, so that's no S at the end of podcast. Anyway, I will stop blabbering on and let you return to your day. Hope you enjoyed this. Take care of yourself, and I will talk to you soon. All the best. Hey, before you head off, head on over to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/transcripts, or go to the website and click the podcast transcript tab to purchase my ebook, which contains the first 14 podcast transcripts. This includes interviews with Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Still, Ben Greenfield, and many more. At over 130,000 words, it's an absolute beast and good value. And the cool thing is you can use Control-F to zero in on keywords related to your main interests. This ebook is packed with evidence-based advice on how to optimize muscular hypertrophy, burn body fat, and improve health and longevity. Once you purchase, you'll receive a PDF and EPUB copy, the latter of which is better for e-readers. So head on over to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/transcripts and grab a copy now.